Hi humans, it's Hannah with my April reading wrap up. I am going to jump right into it. I don't even know how to quantify what I read or how many books I read in April because one was like outrageously short and another one was a reread. We'll get to it. The first book was actually The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. This is the second book in the Poppy War trilogy. If you are not familiar with the Poppy War trilogy for whatever reason, I can't think of one, but if for whatever reason you are unfamiliar with it, it is a grim dark fantasy inspired by the military history of China as well as its folklore. We follow our main character Rin in the first book, who tests into the most prestigious school in the country, which is also a military school, to escape a sort of abusive foster household. And in addition to that, she receives a lot of prejudice because of the darker shade of her skin, and unfortunately that prejudice does follow her into the academy. The first book is kind of divided where we follow Rin in the academy for the first half, and then in the second half we follow a war that breaks out. In the second book we follow the ramifications of that war and sort of, I guess you could say, a continuation of it. I have a lot to say about this book, so I actually took quite a few notes. The first one being that this book and series in general was emotionally exhausting, and it really was, because it is super gruesome, and it is, by the way, unfortunately based on a lot of very true events, and because of that it is, I think, a lot heavier and sadder and a lot more intense for you to realize that this could have all happened, because a lot of it is inspired by things that did happen. So granted, this is a 650-page book, but I do think it took me a lot longer than it should have to finish this, just because it was just so tiring and I just like needed a break every now and then. And a lot of that is due to the fact that it is so incredibly gruesome, and it does not shy away from showing the grotesque nature of war. It just came to a point where I couldn't, like, it was heavy. It was really heavy. It does unfortunately highlight how horrid humanity can be at times, which is why I just felt like I was so tired. But at the same time, it then came to a point where I just like picked up my reading, because the plot was so twisty turny and I was just so unsure of where we were going on this weird journey and where we could possibly end up. But I mean, this book did feel like someone tore into my chest with their bare hands, grabbed my heart, yanked it out, held it in front of me and made me watch it drip blood before crushing it and tossing it aside. Is it a little bit dramatic? I don't think so. That is very accurate of how I felt reading this book. However, despite all that pain it has caused me, I cannot deny how incredible this book is. It is incredibly layered and complex, both in plot, and I do also believe that the characters are very well developed and very different and very individual. And Rin, especially the main character, I think is such a human character. Like, you can see all of the flaws and you can be really infuriated with a lot of the decisions, but at the same time I think you come to really root for her and understand where it's coming from. Even if you don't sometimes agree with it, you're like, okay, I get it, fine. I also happen to love a lot of the character dynamics and a lot of the character development and how certain dynamics themselves in relationships were developed. And even the side characters, I care about a lot of them, and there's this strange friendship dynamic, or several friendship dynamics in this, that I've just grown to really admire and love and care about and like want and fear for. So it was just such an emotional ride. This is definitely a story about pain and suffering and loss, but also about resilience and bravery and sacrifice, and just, oh, I love this series so much. I do have the third book already, but I needed a little bit of a break before I could continue on with the series. Oh, and I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. So after finishing The Dragon Republic, I thought that I wanted something a little lighter and less intense. I thought, hey, this next book is a standalone, kind of a fantasy from what I understood, and I mean, it's a lot shorter. And it is The Midnight Library. The Sylvia Plath quote in the beginning alone should have been a dead giveaway that I was incorrect. But then I still read the first line, and even when the first line read 19 years before she decided to die, and I thought, well, crap. Yet for whatever reason, I decided, meh, let's just keep going. This is written by Matt Haig, who I have also read another book by. So there is a library that exists between life and death, which hosts an infinite number of books, which all kind of feature the different possibilities and the different outcomes made by different decisions in one's life. Our main character, Nora, visits this library and gets to explore all the different lives and chances she could have possibly lived had she made different choices. And I don't know why I didn't realize sooner that this was going to be this type of book, especially considering the fact that the book I read from this author before was called Reasons to Stay Alive, and I don't think that I missed the point that the library existed between life and death. I do think I was aware of that. So where did I think this was going? How did I think this was going to be a lighter read? Whatever. Anyway, it also mentions quantum physics, which is something that I am really intrigued by and really want to learn more about. I can't quite articulate my takeaways from this book without giving away what I think might possibly be spoilers, but I found a strange sense of profoundness. I sincerely apologize for my dogs, but I found a strange sense of profoundness from the simplicity of the messages or of the morals in this story. Simply because I think they are things we know deep down but may have forgotten about what life is and what it means, and finding meaning and purpose and content with it. Themes of regret and possibility are equally prominent, and I think they're explored in a way that makes you kind of reflect on your own life. So this was definitely quite a reflective read, and I think it's extra relevant and even helpful if you deal with any mental health issues, in particular anxiety and depression. I think this book does a pretty decent job in playing on the idea of parallel universes and maybe even kind of like reincarnation, or even the ideas behind near-death experiences and what they could do and how a lot of people like come back transformed from them. It also mentions quantum physics, which is something that I am incredibly interested in and really want to learn more about. And honestly, finishing this book was like releasing a breath that I wasn't aware I was holding. I didn't totally, I think, care about Nora as a character. I more cared about the lessons that her life represented. I don't think I like really cared about her, but I don't think the detachment from the character was necessarily a bad thing or that it harmed the book. I think it was okay because it felt like she was more like a vessel for this moral or this message, or her life was a vessel for this moral and for this idea for you to reflect on. And yeah, I did actually enjoy this, and I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. So at the time I didn't have the third book on me, but at the same time I probably wouldn't have reached for it anyway. However, I did see that there is a little, I don't know if you could even qualify this as a novella, but it was just like a 15-page ebook called The Drowning Faith. So it is meant to be read like, I think, after The Dragon Republic and like before The Burning God. On Goodreads it's just listed as I think like 2.5, so it's meant to be like read kind of in between the second and the third books. And The Drowning Faith mainly just features some events but from another specific character's perspective. So I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars because it is a really interesting perspective that gives an insight into a complicated character dynamic. But I do wish it was like a tiny bit more. I don't know, I mean, I understand that it's just like a little accompanying ebook, but if you're going to include it, then I assume, I mean, yes, it could just be for fun, but I assume that it has a proper purpose and a real purpose, and we learned a lot in those 15 pages, like quite a bit, but it was just like really sporadic little tiny bits that I just wish were just a little bit longer, like maybe 20 pages, you know, and like maybe I just add 5 more pages to have given us a little bit more meat. I don't know, maybe I'm just really into the series and I didn't want to be left with only 15 pages before receiving the third book. Who knows? Next was my reread of The Gift of Imperfection by Brené Brown. This is an audiobook read for me, and by the way, I had just read this for the first time last month, so I will link the video on the screen and in the description box below if you want to hear my initial thoughts and review of it. But during the second reread, I got so much more out of this book than I initially had, even though in the beginning I loved it so much, and I think gave it a 4 out of 5 stars in the beginning, but I ended up going back and changing my rating to a 5 out of 5 because so much more has clicked for me and I have noticed a lot more, and I have taken even more notes on top of the ones that I already had. And essentially this book is by Brené Brown, who is a shame researcher, and she talks about the gifts of imperfection, which are courage, compassion, and connection. She goes through 10 guideposts on how to cultivate all of these gifts of imperfection and how to accept imperfection, and she talks about vulnerability, she talks about shame. The book packs so much, and it was recommended to me by my therapist, and I once again stick to the fact that couldn't have been a more perfect recommendation for me at this time and for how much it was relevant to me. And I do actually think it's a book that everyone should read. I think it's relevant to, I'm pretty sure, everyone, and I definitely everyone has shame. Everyone deals with the consequences of shame. So if you're looking for a good nonfiction that is more like self-development relevant or more mental health, and you're not really sure where to start, I would definitely try this book out. Next, I read The Little Prince by, what's his name? Antoine. I'm not going to. I'll pop it up on the screen. Antoine de Saint. No, I refuse. I have too much pride and too big of an ego for this. So if you read this book and you are of the majority who liked it, you're probably not gonna like what I'm about to say. So let me just start by saying I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. I'm just gonna read my Goodreads review because I feel like it just captures how I feel really well. I said, like, I get it. I get the metaphors and the symbolism and the morals and the messages of lost childhood and potential meanings behind the story, but I don't think this was for me. Like, I appreciate what it did for others, and the biography of the author does give it an edge, but I enjoyed reading other people's reviews more than I did the book. So I don't know, it was fine. There's a point in here that I will end up getting back to. However, I did also add an update. Upon further consideration, I think my issue may have been with the delivery, because I do obviously appreciate the ideas and the messages, but something about the style of writing or just the general method of delivering these morals felt sort of meh for me. Considering this is a translated work, it could therefore obviously be unfair to completely judge it as someone who didn't read the original. So that's my take on the English one, at least. So the point that I want to get back to is the fact that I said that I read the author's biography and that gave it an edge, but I have a weird I don't know, I'm indecisive about how I feel about books that can't stand on their own completely and don't live up to something on their own. But then as a creative and as an artist and as a designer myself, I then understand that context matters, but is the work good enough? Does it have to stand on its own? It's like Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar. If you don't know about her real life, is the book as interesting? I don't know. I mean, I don't think that authors need to go off killing themselves for us to think their books are interesting. I would hope that they are interesting on their own. That's just kind of similar to how I felt here. Would I have been as interested in, I don't know, would other people be as interested in it? Because clearly it didn't affect me as much, but would other people find this as interesting if they didn't know about the author himself being a pilot and how, you know, how his life ended? And I don't know, it's mixed feelings. Also, this was only like 100 pages, 85 pages, I think. And yet it was somehow like painful to read. It was so incredibly boring, and just something about the writing style just didn't click for me, and I didn't feel like I was learning profound messages. And yes, this is a children's book, but a lot of people say that it's suitable for all ages, and I didn't feel that. And honestly, I don't know if I would read this to my kids. I feel like it would confuse them. I don't have kids in the future. When I do have kids, hopefully one day, but even then, I don't think this is the kind of book I'd read for them. So yeah, that is my unpopular opinion. And I actually had a friend who had also just read this book and had a similar opinion to me, and she agreed with me, which was interesting. Okay, this is the last book, but I finally read Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. This is the second book in the Skyward series. So in this series, whatever is left of humanity is stranded on a planet where they are just like barely surviving and consistently being attacked by alien forces. And because of that, they have a military of pilots who defend the planet, and pilots are therefore kind of like the most important people of society and like the most respected and the most celebrated and looked up to. And in the first book, we follow Spencer, our main character, who wants to become a pilot more than anything, just like her father. However, her father has previously fled a battle, and so he was branded as a coward, which is like a massive deal to these people. And so she and her family have been kind of, I guess, marked and outcast from society, and they're not allowed to partake in like regular society things. And because of that, she has to fight to get into flight school. At the end of the first book, we find out some of the most wild information, and the second book just takes that and builds on it, and it mainly follows Spencer on this really massive mission. I love this like so much. I am pretty sure I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I do definitely think the beginning was a little bit slower. This is not something that I personally noticed in the beginning, but someone did recently point out that Brandon Sanderson's beginnings are a little slower, and I think the reason I didn't notice that is because middle to the end of the book, I think, gets to a point where it's just like so intense that by the next time you pick up another Brandon Sanderson book, you just forget that the first half was a little slow. But I did notice it this time because of that comment. I looked to see when the third book comes out, and it is sometime later this year, hopefully, if that is correct. But then I looked at the fourth book, and it comes out like 2023. And I wanted to scream so much because I got so invested in this, and I have so many questions, and I'm just wondering how or what could possibly happen in the next 2 books. Like, this book was full of so many revelations, and you just keep learning some of the wildest things on and on and on. And the characters are so interesting because they are very different types of characters, as in one of them, who is arguably my favorite, is a talking sassy spaceship. What more could you possibly want? That is the line that made me begin reading the series to begin with, and there are many times throughout this that I would like audibly laugh, and it was just really fun, and it's funny at times, like proper funny at times, and just really, it's just really it has the perfect balance of adventure but like friendships and like high stakes, but also like heartwarming. It's just, yeah, I really enjoy this. And Spencer's character is also quite interesting to follow, especially I think in this book in particular, and even more so if you compare her to the first book. It's nice to see her grow and develop and just like kind of become a little bit more mature, and see that she is beginning to, on one hand, sort of understand herself a little bit better, but on the other hand have so many questions and try to figure out what is up, like which is, I'm sure, a very relatable experience to all of us, but in her case it definitely is a little bit different, and read the books and you'll understand what I mean. But I just really enjoyed this. I'm really excited to read more about her adventures and what happens. The ending left me in a point where I was just staring at the page like, no, you did not just do that to me. That is not how this book ends. And I need to make sure everyone's okay. I need the third book right away, because I will be anxious until November when it is hopefully being published, and then after that, while I wait for it to arrive to me, I will be anxious for the end of the year, is basically what I'm trying to say, until I get to read the next book in this series. And it does definitely also have really interesting dynamics and friendships that I really appreciate. And I think my favorite dynamic is Spencer and Mbot, who is the spaceship, because I enjoy human to non-human dynamics a lot. I think it's usually more reserved to like paranormal non-human entities like demons and whatnot, but this definitely, I think, still applies here. So yeah, that is it for everything that I read in April. I've been talking for a while, like the sun was over there when I started and I was like there. I do also apologize for the angle shift throughout this because of the sun. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, don't forget to like it because that really helps me out a lot. Consider subscribing if you're not already. Leave your thoughts in the comments and maybe even share this video, and I will see you in the next one.